For our final panelist of the day, we have I apologize. We have Yustina Trihoni, Nalesti, Dewi, Senior Lecturer and the Head of the Center of Urban Studies at the, I'm going to say this in, Suegijapranata Catholic University of Indonesia. Please let's give her a round of applause.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Yustina from Indonesia, and my apologies if my English is also very limited as well. But I'm trying to present the paper that I have based on the project that I have done for 6 years in Ambon properly. Today, I would like to share about the right for victims of conflict in Ambon to get reparations. On the other hand, this is the obligation or the duty of state to provide reparation program to the victims. It's like two sides of same coin. Before starting, I would like to show this map where Ambon is located. This is Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, and that one in the circle is Ambon in Molucas Islands. It takes about 5 hours flight from Jakarta to Ambon. Molucas province, you can see in the map that Molucas province consists of thousands of islands. It's about 1,700 islands. It's 1% of Indonesian's islands. It's abundant of natural resources, and Ambon is the most densely populated in Molucas. Ambon, yes, Ambonese people mostly divided into 2 religions, Christian and Muslims. A few decades ago, the comparison was about 50 and 40%, and the rest is other religions such as Catholic, Buddhist, Hindus, and traditional faith. A brief overview of those are going like this. The red circles describe Christian Ambonese, and the blue circles describe Muslim Ambonese. They have been tied since centuries in the Pela and Gandong Traditional Brotherhood Agreement. The Pela Agreement is among 2 villages that is bound to be brother for generations despite they are not from the same womb. It is because it was because they have common values, they have a common experience in joy and in a sorrow, and then they make a kind of an agreement to be a brother. And the Gandong agreement among 2 villages, because they believe that they have same ancestor, they have family lineage ties. Pela and Gandong usually involves 2 different villages with different religions. But yes, this one like this, Pela and Gandong Brotherhood. But the Pela and Gandong Brotherhood system is gradually weakened from time to time by the coming of the Muslim immigrant in Ambon, either by transmigration program that is intentionally designed by the central government or voluntarily done by individuals. The green circle is Moluccan immigrants, and they then strengthen brotherhood tied with Ambonese Muslim, replacing Pela Gandong Brotherhood system, and it leads high tensions in Ambon, especially because of religion differences that is trigger conflict. Even though I do believe that it was a political agenda that is wrapped by religious issues. And what actually happened in Ambon? Yes, this is a nasty fight between Christian and Muslim group, and On the Holy Islamic Day, Eid al-Fitr, a dispute between a Christian bus driver and a Muslim youth triggered of violence. Suddenly, there were rumors that the River Protestant Church in the middle of the town had become the target of the Muslim attack. This false alarm triggered both sides to get ready for a large-scale fight, the Muslim with white headbands and the Christian with red ones. So from then on, the mutual opposing parties were called the whites and the reds. By the end of the year, violence had broken several times on Ambon, as well as neighboring islands, causing large number of casualties, taking of lives and property. This one, the conflict before January, and the conflict broke down in January 1999, and then there are many continuous conflict that happened in Ambon. But is the conflict really on religious matters? In the end of 1998, when elsewhere in Indonesia more than 100 churches and several mosques had been destroyed already, the Moluccas were still free of unrest. Many people believed that traditional Moluccan brotherhood Pelakandong would prevail over any menace. However, it turned out otherwise. At the beginning of December of 1998, there were high tensions and rumors, even pamphlets and graffiti on walls about some incited both Christian and Muslim community. It then followed by other minor incidents, fuel resentment between Christian and Muslim. And immediately, some provocators misused the loudspeakers of the mosque to incite Muslims to wage war on the Christian. And then a large-scale clash between Christian and Muslim apparently could hardly be avoided anymore. And what triggered the Christian violence? The triggers of Christian violence is because in the last few decades, Ambonese Christians feel more and more vulnerable. Formerly, they used to be in control of the major government jobs. In the Dutch colonial periods, Christian community had privileged access to important jobs. On the other hand, the Dutch did not give Muslims the opportunity to go to the Dutch schools. This discriminatory policy impacted on the level of education of Muslim and Christian. Muslim commonly had a lower level of education than Christians. It lasted until a few decades ago. The balance has shifted recently because there were many Muslims who moved to Ambon from other regions, had a high level of education and a hard worker, so that they finally were getting important jobs in the government and displacing native Christian Ambonese. This is the reason that the decreased domination of native Christian Ambonese. And then the second, with so many alien immigrants, the Pelakandong brotherhood mentality was significantly weakened. The immigrants do not care about how to maintain and live on the local value. And it triggers Christian anger. And when there was quarrel among native Ambonese, among Christian and Muslim Ambonese, then the native Muslim Ambonese seems to have no difficulty in choosing between either their ethnic brothers, namely the Christian native Ambonese, or their immigrants Muslim brothers. They are choosing spontaneously for the Muslim brothers. In addition, the Christian perceive that on national level in Indonesia, because we are the majority of Indonesia is Muslim, the Christian perceived that on national level, Indonesia was increasingly drifting towards becoming an Islamic state, so that they think that they have to fight against Muslim. On the other hand, what triggered Muslim violence? Firstly, the discriminatory policy that I have mentioned before of Dutch colonial government made social jealousy for a long time in Moluccas in which the Christian communities had some privilege and access to important jobs. And secondly, furthermore, the Muslim did not trust that the Moluccan Christian to be 100 loyal Indonesian citizens. During uprising against the Dutch in 1945 up to 1949, the Christians apparently were afraid being oppressed by the Islamic majority in Indonesia. Many Christians in the Moluccas volunteered as Dutch soldiers, fighting side by side with the Dutch, trusting that the Dutch will fulfill its promise of ensuring independency of the South Moluccan. Nowadays, there are still suspicious that there are a separatist movement in the Moluccas area that still want to be independent, as they have been promised by the Dutch. Even today, Muslim combatants claim to be fighting against the Christian separatists. And then thirdly, the Muslims also favor a literal interpretation of what is considered to be said in the Al-Quran that are interpreted by their leader. For instance, the literal interpretation of holy war against Christian. When they fight against Christian, it means that they fight against infidels. Fourthly, whereas if there were Muslims elsewhere were surrendered by beaten by Christian, they would compromise themselves to revenge in the eyes of their Muslim brothers elsewhere. Based on this background, and then I want to summarize regarding the conflict in Ambon. How the conflict in Ambon happened. In 1999 until 2003, Ambon was ravaged by one of the most shocking and widespread episodes of violence in Indonesia since the communist coup in 1965. It is a very famous tragedy in Indonesia, genocide, spread to the entirety of the Moluccas Island. Nearly the entire population of Ambon took part in the conflict in some manner, either to attack rival groups or to defend their communities. Even elderly, women, children below 10 years, and public actors such as the police and military become involved. People had become both perpetrator and victim of brutal violence and killings at the same time. The character of the conflict, commonly regarded as a horizontal conflict of religious identity between Muslim and Christian communities in Ambon, and more complex with long-term latent tensions between groups, socio-economic and socio-political factors, and possible external interference. Casualties, at least 5,000 persons lost their lives, 300,000 up to 700,000 persons were displaced, and almost 80% of public facilities and houses were destroyed. The suffering of the Ambonese communities aided by unobviousness of the reparation program for the conflict victims are still felt to date. Do victims attributable to reparations? The issue of human rights violation done by state was obscured, as it was assumed as a horizontal conflict between two religious communities. A reparation is considered as a recovery effort that is obliged to conduct by states only if the state has committed misconduct and violated the citizen right. Does state violate the citizen rights? The plural and segregated citizen of Ambon City since the days of the Dutch colonial government, coupled with the arrival of immigrants and the formation of ethnic and religious-based village, had factually created vulnerability. The segregation existing since the independence of Indonesia until the end of the New Order government, in 1998, was left to remain without adequate handling efforts, even though the potential of vulnerability had been predictable from the beginning. In our opinion, based on research, this is the first reason that is the violation of citizen rights was done by the Indonesian government. And the second is the enactment of the two laws, had gradually eliminated the local sacred values as the unifying factors of various groups within Amboni society, and it was to be one of the forms of violation against people's customary right. Both laws caused Ambon local wisdom implemented in government order had been shifted by the concept formulated by central government. This minimized the power and authority of the Raja, the king, the leader of the village, or the king, who were previously very authoritative and charismatic in ruling the local government. This condition in the conflictual atmosphere would further exacerbate and increase the risk of friction among the communities because there were no leaders who were traditionally respected by generations. And the third reason is the escalation of conflict increased after the actors behind the conflict brought thousands of Laskar jihadi soldier members from Java. The presence of the jihadi soldier in Ambon in the context of state's responsibility made it obvious that the issue was to be the state's obligation to overcome the problem so that the chaotic situation would not increasingly rampant. However, the absence of silence of the state made dragging of the conflict cause more victims, and this could be seen as one of the forms of human rights violation happening in Ambon. Why state should do reparation program for the victim? Based on international law, a state has an obligation to make reparation when it does wrongful act. This obligation has become a principle of international affirmed by the Permanent Court of Justice and by the International Court of Justice. It is clear that violation against human rights and against fundamental freedom, especially massive committed, is naturally impossible to be repaired. In such instance, any remedy or redress stands in no proportional relationship to the grave injury inflicted on the victim. It is nevertheless an imperative norm of justice that the responsibility of the perpetrators be clearly established and that is the right of the victims be sustained to the fullest possible extent. In this light, reparation area an imperative part of doing justice to all victims of gross violation of human rights, not only do reparation aim at restoring the victim's dignity, but also at promoting peace and reconciliations. And in Ambon cases, I do believe that the collective reparation is the most important thing. The collective reparation based on Friedrich Rosenfeld states that collective reparation are benefits conferred on collectives in order to undo the collective harm that has been caused as a consequence of violation of international law. So from that sense, Rosenfeld identifies that there are 4 elements in collective reparation, benefits which can take place in variety of different forms. This benefit encompass symbolic, public apologize, memorials, or material reparation. The beneficiaries are collective or group. The aim at redressing collective harm, which is victims who share certain bonds, such as common culture, religious, tribal, or ethnic groups suffer. The harm resulted from a violation of international law. Yeah, this is the base for the collective reparation. It is a product of jurisprudence, both the United Nations 2005 Basic Principle and the updated set of principles to combat impunity have supported the provision of reparation both individually and collectively. Similarly to the Rome Statute of 1999, it has also contributed to the number of victims and the scope make this form of reparation more appropriate. To further discuss the reparation problem, the concept of the victim is very important to be clarified. In the 1985 declaration defines the victim as follows. A victim is a person who personally or collectively has suffered losses, including physical or mental injury, emotional suffering, economic losses, or considerably destruction of his or her fundamental right caused by acts or omission that constitute a serious violation against international human rights law or international humanitarian law. An ideal-based reconciliation model should, in addition to prioritizing the initiative and willingness of the conflicting parties itself, that is in accordance with the values believed to allow the parties to recognize each other's existence and be able to coexist peacefully, include the government effort to facilitate the identification of material losses because of the conflict, then formulate reparation is in the form of compensation and restitution, which includes also law enforcement of criminal acts that cause physically, psychologically, and life of loss. Reconciliation at Ambon had no focus on reparation as one of the keys of conflict resolution and reconciliation. For the fulfillment of reparation for the victims, both individuals and communities, the government of Ambon City should reform and revitalize the capacity of the institution involved in accordance with the local wisdom. Ambonese values and local wisdom as part of the Molucas community had a central role in the reparation process by increasingly strengthening local custom and institution in the governmental and societal structures. To end this presentation, I want to quote what Einstein said, that peace cannot be kept by force, it can only be achieved by understanding. Thank you.